Hey team, today I've got Stephanie from CFI Services joining me. She's going to explain a little bit about her business and what they do and how they help people. And I think it'll be really good for everyone here to take 5-10 minutes to listen and see if it's something that would work for you guys, because I do think it would be quite beneficial for some of you out there. So Stephanie, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool. We wanted to go over three main things really, and that's kind of the things we chose was kind of in relation to how we both see the fitness industry and how it might benefit these guys the most. And those three things that we want to mainly cover is stress and stress management, learned helplessness, which is like a psychological trait that people develop over repeated failures like dieting all the time, and then they sort of learn to be helpless in a way. So we want to try and cover that. And also a bit of trauma, because that's obviously something that impacts a lot of people's lives as well. But I'll leave it on throw the ball to you to pass over and see how you want to cover these three topics yourself.
Yeah, awesome. Kia ora, everyone. I am Stephanie. So I am one of the co-founders of CFI Services. So we have a few branches with CFI Therapeutic Services. So we do individual counselling, support and workshops. And we also work with corporate and trades doing toolbox talks and going into businesses and helping psychological safety. And that can be anything from stress and trauma to suicide triage and wellbeing and a lot of change in neurodiversity. So there's lots of different ways that we support people in this space.
Cool.
So yeah, today we're going to jump into a little bit of stress, trauma, and learned helplessness. So I thought I'd start a little bit with stress, and we can go with that, and then looking at learned helplessness also in relation a little bit to stress and trauma as well, and how they sort of link with one another, and how that might impact, say, people's journeys in fitness or health and well-being as well. Cool. Awesome. Cool. So to start with, stress is one of those things that people often don't want, but it's actually really good for you. Okay. So one of the things you need to think about is that we have a stress response system in our body. It's called the HPA, and that there is the hypothalamus pituitary axis. And that basically is your brain sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which sends another signal to the adrenal gland, which goes, cool, we need to release cortisol because there's a stressor. This is really important. It's really important to help you get up in the morning and to start your day. But it's also really important when you go into a sports competition, or when you're going into an exam, or when you're going into a job interview. Because if you don't have that cortisol, the opposite is a little bit of passive sleepiness, essentially.
Nonchalantness as well, really. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so if you're going into a competition, you're feeling really nonchalant and you're feeling real blasé, then you're not necessarily going to go in with that full energy and that full excitement and that jitteriness, which gets you across the line. It gets you that best, that PB or whatever it is that you're going for.
Yeah.
So stress is really helpful, and cortisol is really good for that, as is adrenaline. However, what happens is sometimes we get to a stage in life where we have chronic stress, or we've got stress is coming in again and again from multiple different areas. And when we have that constant amount of stress, what happens is we've got two different systems. We've got the non-stress, so rest and digest, the relax. This is where your stomach system's working properly, and your airways are constricted because you don't need that blood flow everywhere, and you've got a slower heartbeat. You're resting. It's the evening. That's really good. The stressed zone, again, really helpful if you're going into an exam or a competition, because you have that increased heartbeat, which allows you to get energy and the blood flowing to do what you need to do, whether that's focus on a written task, or whether that's focus on being able to lift weights, or whatever you're going for. And that these two things are floating between the two is good. But if you stick in that stress zone, you can have really bad health issues. But also what can happen is the HPA axis that I talked about before is a feedback loop. Once the stress has happened, once you've dealt with it, it turns it off and goes, oh, I don't need any more cortisol. I'm okay there. And it goes back to normal, and you don't have that surge of cortisol. If you have constant stresses in your life, it goes, oh crap, I should just keep releasing cortisol. And it keeps releasing it at a standard rate. So what happens is then you're constantly feeling stressed and your body is constantly increasing your heart rate or inhibiting stomach activity or doing a lot of things that can cause that chronic pain or cardiovascular issues, all of those things. The other thing that's really interesting is that when you have a constant release of cortisol, your brain doesn't notice when it needs that spike. And that's when people can go, oh, I'm not really feeling that like extra intensity that I need for a competition or that extra spike when it comes to going into a job interview. I just feel quite flatlined in a lot of ways. And that can be quite detrimental for when you actually need stress or,
Absolutely.
from a primitive point of view, when you actually need to run away from a bear, you don't have that spike.
Well, it's something to do run away from bears. But yeah, you're 100% right. And we see this all the time with people that do lots of stressful stuff in their lives going on, relationships, work, etc. Plus, they're also competing in a high-level sporting arena. It does impact a lot on their ability to train and recover. Digestion suffers, and even like for bodybuilding in particular, it can really impact on a person's ability to metabolize and utilize fat cells to utilize it as energy. So cortisol is, like I say, is fantastic, and it's kind of been demonized a little bit on social media wrongly. You actually really need it, but we don't want it high all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is that it's finding that balance. People are getting to that point where they're saying, oh, you don't want to have stress levels at all, but you do. It's really helpful. Positive stress, and it is good for you, but it is just not good long term. So it's finding that balance. And I often talk about sort of a stress trauma continuum, and that's where you can lead stress. Can be one thing that happens from a one-off event or those sorts of things. But then if it's continual, it can become a trauma. And that's where we lead into that trauma space as well. And that ongoing stress or chronic stress or trauma actually changes the brain as well and changes the connections in the brain, which then leads to why you do things or the way you think as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, the trauma is kind of life-changing for some people because they can really struggle to get back to some sort of normality or what their perceived normality is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so figuring out that new normal and figuring out what that looks like in your life is really important, but also figuring out where that stress and where that trauma is triggering in a negative way is really important to recognize, to understand, and then to make positive changes as a result.
Cool. And that's, I guess, where you guys would come into play, is that helping people recognize, understand potential things that are causing the stresses and the trauma and help them mitigate or solve these kind of issues. That's essentially it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so for us, a lot of what we do is the understanding. We don't necessarily come in and go, you have to do this. Solve your life, change your life. And that it kind of leads to that learned helplessness that we'll talk about a bit later. If we just told you what to do, first of all, you're unlikely to do it and do it long term. But also by having that understanding of the neuroscience behind it or the why behind what's happening to you, it gives you that strength and understanding of, oh, cool, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I need to make these changes. And so for stress, one of those key things is that stress is directly related to your amygdala, your hippocampus, your limbic system, the middle part of the brain that deals with that fight or flight. Like I said, it deals with the fact that there is a bear that you need to run away from. And so when you're in stress response, some people fight, some freeze. That whole idea is that people respond in different ways. So the key thing as well is not just with stress, it's not just going what's causing it, but also how do I know I'm stressed? Some people will go, oh, I'm not stressed at all because they have a really high tolerance. But then when you stop and talk to them, they go, oh yeah, no, I've got really tight muscles everywhere and my jaw's real tight and I can't sleep. Okay, so maybe those are some categories or some things and possible symptoms that are linked to stress. Very, very definitely melatonin, which helps you sleep, it is a complete opposite cycle to cortisol. So cortisol is high in the morning, it gets lower in the afternoon as you go through your day so that you can move into rest and digest in the evening. Melatonin is the opposite, low in the morning because it helps you sleep, so you don't want it in the morning, and it gets higher at nighttime. So what happens is if you're in that cycle where cortisol is constantly being released, the melatonin doesn't do it either. It jumps and it becomes flatlined a little bit more too. So that can impact your sleep cycle. So there's a real small way that stress can, regardless, not even thinking about the fact that your brain's just constantly going and all of the other thoughts and things that can happen with stress. And then the other element is that because you're in that limbic system, your limbic system comes on really quickly. It's really, really quick to come on so that you can get away from this fear unless you're in chronic stress. But if it's on, then what can happen is that it doesn't go to your frontal cortex.
Right.
And so your prefrontal cortex is an area of the brain that does logic, it does reasoning, it
Yeah.
makes good decisions.
Yeah.
And this part of the brain it has control. When you're not stressed, it has really good control of your actions, your emotions, and your decisions. Tells you, oh yeah, this is the best next step for me. This is the healthy option. This is good for me. When you're stressed, your limbic system turns on before your frontal cortex. So you don't make those decisions.
That's where you start making those, because I feel this way, this is how I'm going to behave. And like you said, it's not always the best idea to make decisions in a high stress state, like career, relationships, like the big term decisions. I'm always say to my clients, like, when you are struggling, this is not the time to make really life altering decisions, because generally you haven't had that time to think logically and clearly about it anyway. So you're likely to make a wrong decision, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only are you making the wrong decision because you're not thinking clearly, but then another sort of neurotransmitter in the brain that people tend to know about is serotonin, right? It's the happy neurotransmitter. It's the one that makes you feel good. And with this one, there's also a correlation with cortisol, that when there's an increase in cortisol, your serotonin levels decrease. And that's where you start to feel a little bit down if you've got this chronic stress going down. You can also be linked to things like depression, anxiety, and feeling down. But also when serotonin levels are down, you tend to seek out things that might make you happy. So you might decide, I suddenly need to throw in my job and find a new one. That will make me happy. I need to do this life-changing thing. That will make me happy. So you're making a decision without the logic part of your brain, but also to try and give you more of that neurotransmitter and more happiness in your life. And it's not necessarily the right option.
And that's a big thing for people with food, is that they use food as, to feel good and feel happy. And at the time it kind of works. So you have this it's almost like a false positive, because you get the dopamine response from eating poor quality choices of food. So you feel happy for that split second. And then of course you get the negative effect from that and feel worse. So then what do? Oh, that worked for me last time and made me feel a little bit better. So you do it again and again and again. And then it kind of snowballs from there, right?
Yeah, and it creates that feedback loop. Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's that seeking of trying to find something that feels good. Naturally, your serotonin levels are lower at nighttime, so you often find people go, oh, I'll just have a piece of chocolate after dinner, or I'll just have that glass of wine, that'll make me feel better. And, absolutely, if it's, party, if you enjoy it, there's an element that it's okay. But if you're constantly doing it and you don't even realize, it can become this habit of, I'm seeking something to try and feel better, to get that quick fix rather than that long-term kind of feeling that comes from not being stressed and having other things that, actually feeling well from eating healthy is a long-term hit you right in the moment.
Yeah, it's funny you're speaking my language, because another thing I talk about is long-term thinking. Stop looking for short-term quick fix solutions to what is essentially a long-term problem. Like, for example, 8-week challenges. People want to do an 8-week challenge to lose all this weight, but then what? What happens after that? How are you going to replicate this and sustain it for now and forever? So the way we think, and I think social media and today's informational technology age, that we have access to so many things so quickly, we all expect things to happen very, very quickly for us. But our bodies aren't here. They're still basically set back in caveman days, essentially, right? Running away from the bear. And it takes time for our mind and our bodies to adjust and adapt and incorporate new behaviors. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is change behavior patterns rather than quick fix solutions. So these things take time. You know, it doesn't. You wish you could go to one counselling session and all your problems are fixed. They snap their fingers and you're good, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's about our brains technically want to do what's easy. They
Yes.
want to do what's easy, what's quick, and that's why we form habits. And habits are really hard to change. And it's continual reinforcement and continual work on it. You know, you can't win a bodybuilding competition by going to the gym once.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that. And it's the same thing with your brain. If you want to see lasting change, then you have to continually work on it. And things like counseling isn't just for someone that are really struggling at the bottom of the cliff sort of thing. It's actually, it's training for your brain. It's recognizing that your brain is part of you, and it's really healthy to figure out. We all have negative thought patterns or unhealthy behavior that we do from time to time, and it's always good to challenge those and to go, hey, how could I fix that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, even if you're doing pretty well, it's kind of like getting a warrant of fitness for your car. Your car might be great, but you're going in and getting checked. It's like just making sure, and there might be the one or two things that I didn't understand or realize that that's what I was doing, or that's like my behavior trait was like that. But again, like if you are struggling, then it's like if you want to improve on anything in life, you need to put in the work and get expertise, like people like yourself, to help you navigate through that journey. That's why people come and see me as a coach to do their training in nutrition, because that's my field of expertise. You go to a mechanic to fix your car. You don't go to a mechanic to do your accounting, because they're not an expert in that thing. So we need to seek experts in their fields to get their information
Yeah.
from them, and then you can, you know, utilize that for your own development.
Absolutely. And it's where it's thinking about, you know, finding that expertise and figuring out the right fit for you,
Correct.
you know, as well. And that's a really important thing. A lot of people have had one session of counseling and they go, oh, that wasn't the right fit. And it might just be that it's the wrong person or the wrong technique or that wrong conversation that you're having.
Yeah.
And so it's about figuring out that right person, but also taking a look and reflecting yourself of what is my motivation. And that's actually a whole nother topic we could talk about too. But motivation is something that links to what you said of that long-term thinking.
Yeah.
Quite often people go, oh yeah, 8-week challenge, right? Because I know I'm going to lose X amount of weight in this time. And so the amount of weight they're losing in comparison to the time feels feasible.
Yeah.
But if you said, oh, you can lose that same amount of time, but it's just going to take you a year, but it will be sustainable, people don't necessarily go, oh, that's okay, I'm motivated by that.
Yeah.
And I guess that link is, if I said to you, like, hey, I'll give you $5 today, but if you wait a week, or if you wait a year, sorry, I'll give you $10. You'd be like, oh, I'll just take the $5 today. Like, I'm not going to wait a year for that extra $5. But if I said, oh, well, if I give you $5 today, or if you wait a year, I'll give you a grand, you'd be like, you know what?
Yeah,
That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
And so it's changing people's mindset and going, hey, what is it in a year's time? Like in a year's time, you're going to get sustainability. You're going to get the achy jaw that you get from being stressed isn't going to be there. The joint pain, whatever it is that's niggling you, it's all of those things. It's recognizing the long-term sort of gain that you can get from it.
And I really like the way you talk about the science and how it actually works inside of your brain and the hormones around it. Because again, if people understand the why, they are more likely to do it and implement it into their lives. And if we just say, do this, do that, you're not learning, you know, you're not finding things out that you can actually implement into your own life, sustainability for long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often find, you know, a lot of people, if you said to them, oh, you're stressed, I'll just try and like take a couple deep breaths.
Yeah.
You'll get a death stare in result because like, I'm stressed right now. Why does a few breaths help? But actually the idea, as I said, your limbic system's on, you're wanting to run away from that bear, your frontal lobe needs time to turn on. So by stopping, not making any decisions and taking a few deep breaths, you're giving your brain time to switch on the rest of it. And so that's why the breathing is something that really helps people. And not only does it help do that, but it helps to down regulate and turn off the amygdala, the angry response or the upsetness or whatever it is that response is hitting you. It takes time for you to go, oh, I don't need this one on. I need my frontal lobe on. I can make a decision.
Yeah.
And so that's a real simple thing that people will go, I don't need to breathe, like get over it.
Yeah.
But it's so simple in so many different ways, and the why really helps people to understand that.
It does. Yeah, you're right. Because people say, just take deep breaths, and you're like, no, it doesn't work for me. Well, actually, when you explain how it actually works inside of your brain, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so that kind of, that thinking and that ongoing, if you've been through lots of stress or that chronic stress, that's where things can happen, where that learned helplessness can come into play.
Yeah.
And learned helplessness is a thing that comes into play because of previous, how you've dealt with things in the past.
Yeah.
Your brain is strengthening the connection of this is the right response, right? And so what happens is if you have these uncontrollable situations, then you don't know how to escape them, and that can be a big thing, but it can become, oh well, I've never been able to say no to chocolate, so
Yes, exactly.
I can't say no.
Yeah.
And so it's this learned helplessness. I know I can't do it, so what's the point? And so what's happening there is you've got your amygdala, like I said, is your fear. It turns on for stresses, and it can be this overwhelming feeling of stress, and then you don't know how, you're helpless to it. You don't know how to escape it because it's happened so frequently.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to escape it, then what happens is that this chronic stress can impact your hippocampus, which is the memory part of your brain. And if it's impaired the memory part of your brain, then you haven't been able to store new memories of actual times that you've been able to say no to something, that you've been able to make that right step. All that you can remember is that in an uncontrollable situation, you don't know what to do. You're helpless. You're helpless to making a decision for yourself. And so it just ends up that you are helpless essentially in that situation because of your continual behavior in that space.
Yeah. It's crazy how much it can impact your future outcomes from the decisions you make today can affect you in a year's time if we don't make the right decision and if we keep repeating these same mistakes. We see it a lot in relationships and counselling. You would see it a lot as well. Going back to the same person, even though they've been repeatedly abusive or whatever it is. Diets, I see it all the time. People are doing, I've tried every diet under the sun and none of them seem to work, so nothing works. It's like, well, it's not the diet, it's not work, it's the way it's been set up, or potentially your mindset around it and things like that. A whole lot of other reasons that it cannot work. So
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And so it's that continual practice every day on it sort of thing. If you tell yourself, oh, I'm useless, I'm not able to sustain a diet, you are literally forming neural connections in your brain that go, oh, look, here's another thing that reminds me that I'm useless. And that's a really strong narrative that becomes a fact in your life. It sounds cheesy, but if you tell yourself I'm amazing every day for a year, then you're going to believe you're amazing. Even if you stuff up, your brain's like, oh, that's true. I believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's positive reinforcement is a massive thing. And when you're always putting yourself down, you get so used to being in a negative space that everything becomes negative, and you're very, very good at seeing the negative at things, all the time, and everything's probably glass half full, all that kind of stuff. But like I say, if you're positive and you actively seek the positivity around situations and events that happen to you, even if they're not good events, it's like, well, this happened, which really sucked, but the silver lining was X, Y, Z. You're more likely to be able to keep that positivity going for other things in your life and keep maintaining it, rather than get into that whirlpool of just doom and gloom and everything's bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's exactly that whirlpool, and it can happen in your own life, but it can also happen in how you see other people. And what happens is this idea of that subconscious bias almost comes out, right? I talked to a client the other day. I was like, pick a rugby player that you just don't like.
Yeah.
And so we picked one, really good rugby player in the All Blacks.
Yeah.
And he goes, he goes, okay, cool. It's a 14-year-old. I hate Bodie Barrett. I was like, okay, cool. You've decided that. And I was like, right. So when Bodie does a really good job and he gets a try, what do you think? He goes, oh, well, it's not him. Someone else helped him.
Yeah.
Like, he's still crap. I'm like, so even if he does anything good, you've decided you don't like him.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if anything good happens, if he like made massive changes and you know, in your mind, he's still, even if he does a try, even if he saves the game, even if he just nails everything in a game, you'll still find something you don't like about him.
Yeah.
And, you know, we used that because then I was able to transfer that conversation to somebody else in his life who was closer to him and that he was struggling with. But the same thing happens for relationships. But the same thing happens for your own relationship with food, your own relationship with your well-being, your own relationship with your fitness and training. I was like, oh, if you're constantly saying, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not going to get there, then it doesn't matter how much pep talk you've got from your coach, you're not going to get there.
Yeah. So,
because, hey, that time that you got a PB, oh, well, that wasn't me. That was because Chris was there and he pushed me that day.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And, you know, great, you know, you've obviously done a lot of pushing and a lot of, you know, great support there, but they're not going to get that again because they don't have the mindset of it.
As a coach and counselling as well, you lead that horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's still that person that does the work. You know, we can give them all the plans in the world, but they're the ones going to the gym, eating the food. So, you know, it's always amazing to hear real positive feedback from people, but it's always like, well, that's cool, but you also need to say that about yourself because, in fact, you've actually done more than what I have. I've just given you the tools, resources to be able to implement it into your life. You've got up every day, gone to the gym, eating the food. You know, that's hard work. So people need to be, and I think it's probably definitely a human trait, and especially a Kiwi trait, that we don't sing ourselves our own praises enough. And yeah, we were very quick to pull ourselves down and not be arrogant or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to give off that vibe that you're sort of being arrogant, and that's actually there is a difference between confidence and arrogance.
A massive difference.
You know, it's okay to be confident. It's okay to be like, yeah, I'm awesome. Like I nailed that. But one of the things that is also important is that sometimes the reason we don't recognize our progress is because it's small.
Yes.
And if you have slowly lost weight, or if you've slowly gained, you know, body strength and your ability to lift weights or to eat healthy, and you've slowly cut things out of your diet, or whatever it is that you're working on, you often don't. You go, oh, well, I've made no changes from yesterday. But if you look back, and this is something that comes up a lot in counselling, I had a client the other day who was a lot of stresses happening, and they were like, oh, but I'm like, my head's above water right now, like I'm kicking, you know, intensely underneath. And I was like, okay, why? Well, I have to. Like everything else is going on. I've got to sort this out. And I'm like, okay, do you remember 6 months ago? And they were like, oh, you know, I'd be like asleep, curled up in a ball, like just struggling like intensely. And so it wasn't until I pointed out, hey, let's reflect back, that I realized how much progress they'd made. And so sometimes I think it's really important to have those like reflections, and check in with yourself to be like, oh, what progress have I made? It might be small, but it's bloody good.
It's huge, and this is why we track everything that we do. You know, nutrition, training, strength, sleep, steps, etc. Because and photos and body weight, because it's week to week you might not see any difference, but if you look 6 weeks, 3 months, you know, etc. back, the changes can be quite substantial and drastic. But you don't see that yourself because you're so used to seeing yourself every single day. It's really hard mentally to do that though, because there's nothing where you can really track that. Like you can't take a photo of yourself and depressed and stuff like that in the past and reflect back on that. It's just not going to happen. But I think it's a really good point, you know, that being able to take a step back and say, the person I am now, if I was in the same situation 6 months ago, would I be able to understand it and sort of function, or would I be an absolute wreck? You know, what would I be doing? Oh, well, that's progress. And in all honesty, it's the best progress you can possibly make, because one, it's so hard to track, but two, it's behavioral. So these things take so long, and so many, like I say, habits and setting and reaffirming yourself all the time, that to make those changes is bloody earth-shattering, and you should be super proud of those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the key things of making changes for learned helplessness, for trauma, for stress, for all of those things. To make that progress is not only view it, but is to gain a sense of control. What is it I do have control over, and what are little steps that I can do, and how can I challenge the behavior, challenge the beliefs, and challenge the fact that I'm sitting there like I've made no no progress.
Yeah,
That year
absolutely.
in itself, you can look at facts versus stories. The
Yes.
fact is, I'm this, feeling today.
Yeah.
The story, that means I've made no progress. It's actually challenging that and going, hang on, what is the actual fact here?
Well, that's, yeah, again, like science and data don't give a shit about your feelings. If you feel bad, it's like, well, that's a feeling. It's not actually altogether true. It can be sometimes, right? Because feelings do matter and they do have value, but it doesn't always reflect what's accurate and true, especially when you're stressed and putting yourself down. These are often tend to be a little bit skewed.
Yeah. And what happens is actually, like, whilst emotions and feelings are super important,
Mm.
is we don't tend to have the nuanced understanding of all the different types of emotions that are out there. And so actually, you might go, oh, I'm stressed, but you might just be a little bit overwhelmed, but not stressed.
Yeah, okay.
Or physiologically, if you take away all labels and you just think what's happening in the body, the feeling you get when you're excited is exactly the same physiological response as when you're stressed.
Mm.
Because, if you're excited to be going out and presenting something on stage, you feel the jittery, you feel all of that stuff. And it might be that you're stressed too, but,
Yeah.
it's good. Like we said,
Yeah.
that going right back to the beginning of the chat about the cortisol and it being good. And sometimes it's good to take away the label and just think, hey, how am I feeling in my body?
Yeah.
And
Cool.
recognizing it. Emotions are energy.
Yeah.
Emotions, you can have high energy emotions like anger or stress or anxiety or rage, and you can have low energy emotions that are unpleasant as well, like sadness, depression, feeling lonely.
Yeah.
But then you can have high energy emotions that feel good, happiness, excitement, motivation, or chill, content, loving, where you don't have a lot of energy but you feel good. And so actually just taking that whole step back and go, what's my energy levels right now? What's happening in my body? And then, okay, what can I do with that information? Do I want to stay in this space? Is this going to help me with my competition? Is this going to help me with my next step? Or do I need to do something to lower my energy levels?
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I think that's really good information that you've shared with us today. So really appreciate that. So how do people contact you, and what sort of services could you help them with that we've covered today?
Yeah, cool. So we have, like I said, the different strands. So we largely, CFI Therapeutic Services is the name of our counselling business. And so we do couples counselling and family counselling. And we work a lot with people with learned helplessness, with anxiety, depression, also motivation as well. And just sometimes going, hey, what are some techniques, some tips, some strategies that I can implement in my life to have these sort of conversations with myself, with other people, make changes. And so through that, it's just what we do is we've got our website and corporatetherapeuticservices.com, which you can book a free initial consultation. And so the initial consultation is a chance to say, this is what's going on for me. Can you help me? And we can go, yep, cool. And we can either place you with the right counsellor. We can talk to you about the ways we can support and all of those different things. We've got a bunch of courses sort of coming out in the new year around motivation and anxiety as a first couple.
Cool.
But the key thing is, that ongoing counselling support. We are in person in Wellington, but around the country, we have a lot of clients online. And we do have a few clients in Australia as well. So we do online or over the phone as well. Some people don't really want to do face-to-face. And they're used to they want to hear a voice, hear some talking and stuff. So we offer those different modalities to sort of support that.
Working.
Yeah. And we also work with companies and go in with our corporate and trade side of the business. And we go in and help change the dynamic and change the team culture within companies and support it to help people, because you spend a lot of time at work. So it's important to find that balance. So we help in those different ways.